Welcome back to another episode of Better Than I Found It, the podcast all things college golf. You're listening to Mike McGraw, the men's golf coach at Baylor University. Today's guest on Better Than I Found It is Northwestern golf coach Pat Goss. Pat has been at Northwestern either as a player, an assistant coach, head coach, and now his current title, which is Director of Golf and Player Development for both men's and women's golf at Northwestern. He's been there for over 32 years. In that time, his teams have accomplished quite a record on the golf course. Combined 7 Big Ten championships and finished 2nd, 3rd, 5th, 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th at the NCAA. All total, his teams have qualified for the postseason, regional, or national championship 42 out of 46 years for both programs. But what makes Pat a really different and special college golf coach is the fact that he's actually a recognized teacher. Golf Magazine has put him in their top 100 teachers in America. He was the 2012 Illinois PGA Teacher of the Year. And he's done something that's pretty unique in college golf. He's actually taught a world number 1 for that player's entire career. That's Luke Donald, who played for Pat at Northwestern. He's also taught other tour players like Webb Simpson, short game and putting for 8 years. He's a fantastic coach, a wonderful teacher, and a really great example of what a college golf coach can be. So I hope you enjoy this podcast today with Pat Goss from Northwestern. All right, Better Than I Found It faithful. Join me in welcoming longtime Northwestern coach Pat Goss to Better Than I Found It. Pat, appreciate you being with me on Better Than I Found It today.
Yeah, Mike, thanks for having me on. Honored to be here.
Well, I asked you about this a while back, and we tried to get it on our schedule. It just didn't happen. But we see each other occasionally at tournaments during the year, and I just thought, I kept on thinking to myself, why haven't I talked to that guy? He's got so much to offer. I want to hear it. But on that note, we are in the middle of the throes of a really busy April. I mean, my team's going to play in 3 events. One of them is a 72-hole event at the conference championship. I assume you guys are in the same whirlwind. Tell me about your month.
Yeah, as you know, this is a busy time of the year for us, starting kind of mid-January, especially for the northern schools, with taking some practice trips early in the year. And we just finished up. Our last trip was our 11-day spring break trip, and we went to San Francisco. We went to Bandon Dunes, ran into your buddy Alan Bratton down at Bandon Dunes. And then we finished up by playing in the Duck Invitational, Casey Martin's event at Eugene Country Club, which was great. And then we've been home, and we'll finish up here. We're going to UVA for the Louis Chatingua event and at Birdwood, a really great event at a great course. And then we'll go down and finish up in the Midwest. We'll play at the University of Illinois event as our last event right before Big Tens. And then really excited for the Big Ten Championship this year at Scioto. We've been really fortunate to have amazing venues for our Big Ten Championships, and this is a really special one.
Scioto, it doesn't get talked about that often, but it is a tremendous golf course. I mean, like off the charts.
Yeah, tremendous golf course. And then obviously the history. You're going to go play a golf tournament, the place where Jack Nicklaus grew up playing and learning the game from Mr. Grout. So be really a special week for the kids.
That's great. Well, April is just as busy as ours, maybe even busier. So I'll wish you best of luck on all that.
Yeah, thanks. You too.
Yeah, thank you. I think you and I have a lot of things in common. We're both students of the game. We love the game. But we both wanted to play for a living. And you played your college golf at Northwestern, and you wanted to play. It didn't work out. So I know my path and how I got to coaching, but how did that work for you?
Yeah, so my path really was, I was influenced by some great coaches and teachers who really led me that direction. But I realized in college that I was not a good enough player. I was kind of a marginal 6th guy on an average college team. I was a really hard worker. I was always the guy the coach leaned on. I loved the game. I was a student of the game. I really worked hard at it, but really didn't have the ability or it just never came through. So there's so many things I learned as an adult I wished I'd have known as a kid that I do think would have helped me. But I was very fortunate my senior year of college. My coach then at Northwestern was Jeff Morey. And Jeff was really the first one who said, you know what, I think you should really think about teaching golf for a living, coaching golf for a living. I think you'd be really good at it. And at the time, I was a little bit more interested in just the business end. And what happened is I originally went to work for a golf course development and management firm right after I finished at Northwestern. And then Jeff's, kind of cobbled together a little bit of money to have an assistant coach. And that's back in 1992. There weren't many assistant coaches. I don't even know, were you coaching yet then, Mike?
I was coaching high school golf, but when I went to work for Mike Holder, I think less than half of the Division I teams actually had assistant coaches. Not very many.
Yeah, there weren't money. So Jeff got a little bit of money together from his booster club, and it was kind of a part-time job. And so then I had to work at a club in the summer and teach a bunch of golf to really earn a living. And I did that at Lakeshore Country Club. So Jeff was really the one who saw some potential in me as a very young guy, probably saw something I didn't even think was there, and really got me into coaching. But I spent 5 seasons as Jeff's assistant at Northwestern, and one of my best friends and somebody I greatly admire and had made a great impact on me and our program. And then Jeff left in the middle of the year to go be the director of golf at Conway Farms Golf Club. And so I always tell people, Mike, Jeff Morey did me a lot of my biggest favors in life. You know, one, he saw something in me that probably I didn't. He gave me an opportunity. Then ultimately, when he left Northwestern, he did me another great favor. He left me a really good team, and he left in the middle of the year, so they had to hire me as interim. Then that team was so good, even I couldn't screw that up. So he did a lot of good things for me.
You know, I think that's underrated when, I wrote that book Better Than I Found It, and that's what this podcast is named. Is like, I pray that when I leave this program at Baylor for another coach, that he's got he's not scraping the bottom of the barrel or he's starting over new. You don't want that.
No, I think about that a lot. I mean, I've got a lot more years to coach, but I'm already at a point in my career where I think a lot about how we're going to steward Northwestern golf and what I want it to be someday when I'm done with it, because it's meant so much for me. So I want to make sure I leave it in great shape for the next person to go on and have greater success than I ever did.
Absolutely. And speaking of that, you've been there 32 years as an assistant coach and head coach. You talked to me before this podcast about how proud you were and excited you were for your current title, which is Director of Golf and Player Development for both men's and women's golf at Northwestern. Why does that give you such a sense of pride?
I love the way we run our program. And probably even more than that, I love the people in our program. And to me, Northwestern Golf is a community. It's a family. We work really hard to build that family with our alums, our current players, our supporters, and hiring Emily and Fletcher and Beth Miller as our women's coaches after I became director of golf was, one of the greatest things I've ever done. Really amazing people, amazing coaches. So I love everything about it. We really run our two programs as one entity. We share resources. We share all our intellectual property. We share everything. We separate the coaching a little bit more, where David and I focus more on the men, Em and Beth more on the women, but there's a lot of crossover there as well. But it's really an incredible environment to come to work every day, to have this group of, now we have 6 coaches with the third assistants, and we have a full-time trainer, and to have all these people so committed to the program working together and not really caring which program they're working for. They just want to see our kids have success. They want to see the program as a whole continue to grow and develop. But yeah, that's really been a fun role for me. I started that in 2007. I became the director of golf and player development. Then I hired Em and Beth in 2008. And shoot, we've been together 16 years, I guess now.
That's amazing. And that doesn't happen on every campus. There's a lot of campuses where there's a big division. There's a void in between, or a wedge in between the two programs. And I knew at Oklahoma State that I love the fact that we had Carson Creek and the women were together. Here at Baylor, we've got the Billy W. Williams golf facility. The men and women share the facility. And I want the women to be great. I really do. I want that program to be awesome. So
yeah, for me, Northwestern Golf is just Northwestern Golf. The last few years, I've tried to really work hard to even give our club team some more opportunities, because again, I think it's the same thing. Northwestern Golf is Northwestern Golf at any level. So yeah, but coaching the women's team has been a lot of fun. As I said, Em and Beth are great coaches. They've had incredible success. And one of the reasons I wanted to do it too is we had not had much success at women's golf yet at Northwestern. But at that point, we'd had incredible success in women's lacrosse, women's tennis, women's softball, all of these sports. And I knew we'd have great success in it. So there was a little bit of an ulterior motive there, that I knew we'd be successful, and really thought if we worked hard, we could be. And Em and Beth have surely brought that to fruition.
Well, and the kids have benefited greatly, and that's the most important thing, that the student athlete benefits. So, oftentimes we're remembered by the players that we've coached, especially the well-known players. It's like when somebody thinks of Ricky Fowler, they probably think, okay, Mike McGraw coached him. Or somebody thinks of, Tiger Woods, Wally Goodwin coached him. And so you can kind of get that, especially if a player is great in college and then becomes a great professional. So I think it's hard to mention your name and not remember a world-class golfer, a great player named Luke Donald, who was from England. And I mean, he is your most notable former player, and he's done the most in the professional ranks. But how in the world, first of all, we're going to talk a lot about him. How did you get him from England to Chicago in the first place?
Yeah, it's a good story. I've heard Luke tell this story a lot. We recently just did a donor event together this winter, and I heard him tell it again. Well, first off, we'd had a lot of players from England. I had two teammates from England, and back then recruiting international players was a bit of an art form. Where now with the accessibility of the internet and just how much more involved, I think it's pretty similar to recruiting domestic players. But back then, you had to have relationships, you had to have connections. You were really chasing a lot of tough leads a lot of times. But like I said, I had two English teammates. Then we had a player named Jonathan Loosemore come over who won a Big Ten championship from Leeds and was a great player. So we'd had a good history with some UK players, and then had the opportunity with Luke. But the reality is with Luke wanted to go to Stanford. Mm-hmm. And he would have hoped to be Tiger's teammate. I think they would have missed with Tiger turning professional. But ultimately, when things didn't work out for him at Stanford, Wally Goodwin had coached at Northwestern before then and suggested to Luke, as he needed to find another school, that he should look at Northwestern. So really, it was our former coach, Wally Goodwin, who kept pushing a great player in our direction. And we were able to establish a great relationship with him in recruiting and show that these international players had good success. He got over here on an official visit and liked it. So we got, like so many things in life, it took a really fortuitous break. And then hopefully we did a good job with that lucky break we got.
Well, you seize opportunity. When you get an opportunity like that, you have to seize it and do something with it. Mike Holder told me something the day I got on campus in 1997. He said, Mike, you've got a big responsibility because two of the best junior golfers in the country, Charles Howell and Boyd Summerhays, will be freshmen in 2 months. And that's a big responsibility because those kids have big dreams. So I know you felt the same way about Luke. He had a dream of playing professional golf, and you helped him through that.
Yeah, and that was really important for us. And we've been fortunate. Jim Benepe had been here in the 80s and was a multiple-time first-team All-American and then won on tour. Scott Rowe had played just before Luke, and Scott had been a multiple-time first-team All-American and was doing well professionally. So I think we'd shown we had a history that if you had the ability, the work ethic, whatever the innate skills were that you needed to go be a tour player, that we were providing you the resources to help you develop that way. And I think that meant a lot to Luke at the time. And I always want that to be one of the hallmarks of our program, just like Coach Holder talked to you. That if you're a good enough player with what it takes to be a professional, I want to make sure that we're a big part of your journey along the way and can help you push in a positive direction towards that goal. To me, that's the ultimate.
I definitely agree with you, and I want to talk a little bit more about that. But before we jump in that again, I want to ask one other question. I was watching from afar as the assistant coach at Oklahoma State and just watching in amazement. And I remember Luke played with Charles Howell in the final, either round or final 2 rounds at Hazeltine in 1999. And I remember thinking to myself, man, this kid, this is the first time I've seen him. He's amazing. And so I watched him and we got to see him at the regional in 2001. He was injured that week, unfortunately. And I don't even think he could swing a golf club hardly, and he tried. So that was the last time I saw him play in college, but I couldn't get over how much he did with what God gave him. So that's what I saw. But what were his 2 or 3 best qualities that set him apart from any other player at that time?
Yeah, Mike, those were good memories. Yeah, you remembered all of that correctly. And, we had a great opportunity with programs you were involved in. We played in the final pairing on the final day at NCAAs with Oklahoma State in both 97 and 99. 97 Pepperdine won, 99 Georgia won. But that was really a great opportunity for our golf program to be at that pairing and to be paired with Coach Holder, the greatest coach and what you and I have ever done, the greatest coach there for sure. So those were great times. And Luke he came in as a freshman and he had good success. He was a 3rd-team All-American. And some of the skills we saw then were, one, he was an incredibly level-headed, very observant person. He's never been an overly emotional player. He really quietly put his head down, did his work, really understood the game. And I'd say some of the skills we saw initially were incredible ability to control the flight of his irons and the distance his irons flew. And that was really a hallmark of his game. was his approach play. He was the best I'd ever coached at that. When it came time to control your ball in the wind, to flight your ball, to hit your ball the correct distance, to move your ball both directions, to use the wind in the manner you wanted, he really had that skill. Now, what he probably lacked in his first year was a little bit of speed. He hit it very low. Growing up in England, he hadn't needed to flight it far. He had to get adjusted to playing golf in America. And really Luke and Paul Casey were kind of at the forefront of a lot of players starting to come over here from the UK and really seeing that they could benefit from our programs and ultimately be ready for professional golf. But between his freshman and sophomore year, between some swing work, some fitness work, some club fitting work, he really put on some distance that really helped him, brought him up to a highly competitive level. And then by his sophomore year was the year he won NCAAs at Hazeltine and was National Player of the Year and ended up winning 13 tournaments at Northwestern.
Yeah, I mean, all of that makes sense to me. And, I was thinking about when you just mentioned that level-headed and observant and calm. And, I was thinking that's one of the qualities that made Ludwig Aberg one of the most prepared players to play college golf since Tiger. I mean, and he just had so much maturity. And I always looked at Luke and thought, man, that guy's mature. He's got to be able to play this game for a living. There's no doubt. And so let's talk about that. He did turn professional and he became the #1 player in the world, held that title for 56 weeks, won all around the world, played well on every tour he ever set foot on. It was amazing. But he actually did something that's pretty rare in college golf. He's trying to play world-class golf, and he invited his college coach on that journey. So that's rare. It doesn't normally happen. And you're one of the few who's been able to do that. You've been his coach basically for over 20 years or more, somewhere in that range. Tell me about how do you think he trusted you, why he trusted you, and how's that relationship built through the years?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, thanks for asking that. And obviously, it was the most influential thing that happened in my career. It really changed so much of my professional career when Luke Donald asked me to come do that with him. That really made a big impact on me. For one, it opened up a whole new world to me, where all of a sudden I was getting access to be out on tour to watch the best players in the world train, the best coaches, the best trainers. Built a lot of good relationships out there, but it really did give me a window into what the best players in the world were doing. But that was a big honor for me when Luke asked me to do that. But I think in the end, Luke Donald doesn't really like change. He's a very consistent person. He's a very prepared person. I think some of these are characteristics that made him such a strong Ryder Cup captain. So from his perspective, when he came to me, he felt like he'd really improved over his 4 years. And he really didn't want to go chase down and find another teacher. And we'd obviously worked a lot on his fundamentals as well as all of his game and development through that. So I think for him, he just felt like, hey, I'm doing pretty good here. Why do I need to change this just for professional golf? And it was a great relationship. Especially he was living in Chicago. He based himself out of Chicago for most of that time. He was at our team practices. So it was really easy to keep going forward in the same direction for him and continue developing his skills. But it was interesting when he got out on tour, Mike, for a guy who'd been National Player of the Year and a 3-time first-team All-American, there was really much more a sense then. That was the same time as Charles and Adam Scott and Matt Kuchar. A lot of great players were coming out at that time. But there was really a sense then, and I think it was because Tiger was so dominant, that this isn't the tour that you come out and win on right away as a young guy. You got to really develop your skills if you want to become a top 10 or a top 25 player in the world and have a chance to win majors. It was really a much different attitude than I see now, which is much more, hey, if you're Ludwig and you're a prepared college player, you can come out and take this thing by storm. You can do what Nick Dunlop did even when you're in college. That was really not the sentiment then. The sentiment then was put your head down, go get a lot better and learn from these veterans along the way. And Luke did find when he first turned professional that even though he was a great amateur, he was deficient in some skills that he was going to need as a professional. And he really embraced that and went to work on developing those skills.
Well, I mean, it's like that's what you're trying to get players to do while they're in college, is develop their skills to a certain level where you can have a competitive team. But it's obvious every level you jump up, there's just more to that level. And pro golf definitely is. I still find it amazing, though, in a day where speed has meant so much, he still plays professional golf today.
And it's kind of strikingly awesome as far as I'm concerned. And Zach Johnson, and we could name some others that have continued to play great golf, because if you do maximize the other things, yeah, you can mitigate some of that deficiency where the other guys are hitting a 330 and you're not. So
And I think you can. And that's one thing. I'll talk about this a lot, especially in the day where we have so much more analytics, and we understand strokes gained. One of my least favorite things people do, Mike, is when they aggregate strokes gained and use them as an average. So then it really comes out and they say, well, speed's the only way. You've got to have speed and you've got to train that speed, which I do agree. Speed is, I always say it's a modern fundamental. And I don't know 25 years ago that we talked about speed as a fundamental, but it is a modern fundamental for sure. But the thing I've really learned from strokes gained, I believe, is that you've got to find your formula. And Luke found his, and it was fun going through that process with him, because a big part of Luke getting to number one in the world was analytics. And I was very fortunate to get introduced to Mark Brody back in 2009. And this is long before the tour had started using strokes gained. I mean, I remember the first time I got introduced to Mark. I mean, and theoretically, I have an economics degree from Northwestern, and I'm supposed to be pretty good at numbers. And the first time I looked at that, I'm like, this is calculus. This doesn't make any sense. But then as you understood it, it made a lot of sense. But, Luke was an early adopter of strokes gained when it wasn't a public stat. And it was really one of these 1% opportunities he had that he took advantage of. But what he really found out back then was to be number one in the world, he needed to gain 2 shots around over the average PGA Tour player. And basically that formula for Luke back then was he had to zero out driving. That at his length, if he drove it pretty straight and pretty well, he could be positive 0.1, positive 0.05, but he just needed that to zero out. He wasn't going to gain strokes there. But then what he had to do is he had to be a great approach player, great wedge player, great short game, great putting. And really putting was one of his great opportunities where he could get to like positive 1-shot putting. He could get another 0.7 or 0.8 or 0.9 in his approach play. Then he could gain more in the short game. And he always knew that was his formula. And then he really based his practice around that. So he was always trying to develop his driving, but in his best, he was never overly concerned about his driving. He was really concerned about being great at iron play, approach play, wedge play, short game, and putting. And that's really how he structured his work.
And those things didn't require a huge amount of strength or length or speed or whatever. If you become a proficient driver and do all those other things that well, I mean, that's a perfect example of how guys should use strokes gained to benefit his preparation and ultimately benefit his results. It's great. Yeah. Did you help him with that?
I agree with that. And I think that's how I'd like to see people use it. And again, that's why I don't like the averages. I don't like it when they aggregate them together, because one thing I always argue with averages is that just means half the people are on the left side of it, half the people are on the right side of it. We don't even know if the middle is the right way to do it. But there are people who are outside the standard distribution there that are making millions of dollars a year playing golf with a completely different formula. So go find your formula. And one thing, Luke always gets mad at me when I say this, Mike, but watching Luke Donald in college and then as he turned professional, he could never run fast. He could never throw hard. He could never throw far. He could never kick hard. But he was a really high hand guy. He was great at billiards. He was great at darts. All those types of things he really had a skill for. So it really, his natural DNA was much more for those fine motor skill, high skill things to develop, not for the speed thing.
So, you mentioned obviously finding the things that are going to give you the most improvement, whatever. I mean, you think about Jack Nicklaus, his career was way before we had any sort of way to document this with numbers, right? We couldn't do it. We did know that he was further down that fairway than just about anybody he played against. And most of the time he was in the fairway. So I could not even imagine how many shots he gained off the tee over a career. It must have been off the charts. His approach play was similar to Tiger. It was that good, especially long irons and mid irons. His wedge play was very poor, chipping until he actually worked with Phil Rogers in 1980 or 79 or 80 was horrible. He was a great putter, but he didn't make as many putts as Tiger did, but he made a lot. But he knew where he gained, and he was good at those things. He didn't get to wedges. He didn't put his ball where he couldn't hit it. So anyway, I think Luke probably did as good a job of maximizing what God gave him as anybody I've ever seen.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I remember talking a lot with, as Luke moved down to Florida as he got older and he's spending a lot of time at the Bears Club where all the tour players hang out. Spent a lot of time with Eric Vayus, the head professional at the Bears Club. And Eric had caddied for Jack Nicklaus on the Champions Tour and had worked at Lost Tree where Mr. Nicklaus did all his practicing. But we talked about it a lot. And Eric told me, he's like, he basically didn't practice chipping. He knew that wasn't his strength and what his game was built on. It was similarly, Luke's game had to be built on that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Wow, good. Well, I knew you're a thinker. You're a really intelligent guy. So I knew that there had to be something you did with Luke that included those numbers, especially, I mean, strokes gained came out not as a public thing, but it came out before he became number one in the world to the tour players. So I'm sure you were able to help him with that. So
yeah, it was a big part. And again, he was building his practices. One thing Luke loved that was a big part of his confidence, it was very developmentally based. It was all about getting better every day. I remember kind of in his journey to number one, and when he was number one, he was on Twitter a lot, and it was always hashtag keep getting better, hashtag better every day, hashtag 1% better. The more he focused on that, but he loved anything that could be measured and showed him that he had improved. He would talk a lot about that he didn't want anecdotal evidence that he was better. He wanted actual factual evidence that he was better. So really that strokes gained with Mark and then trying to build practices that Luke could measure and see improvement was a big part of his progress and journey as a professional.
That's great. Well, his career obviously ascended as number one in the world and then kind of leveled off and kind of went down there for a while, which I'm sure you were still working with him. I'm sure it was tougher. It was getting more and more difficult as the tour got much more difficult to compete. But, and so those are ups and downs that every golfer has. But I guess I'm going to ask this question. He was probably one of the best Ryder Cup captains in recent memory. And I think the players had so much respect for him over there. Tell me about that Ryder Cup experience, because I know you got to experience it and you had some Northwestern alums that got to. So tell me about that whole process.
Yeah, that was really a fun week. And going back to Luke's career, I mean, the Ryder Cup was something that was always of utmost importance to Luke. As a player, he really lived for the event. He was very fortunate in his first Ryder Cup when Bernard Langer took him as a captain's pick at Oakland Hills in Detroit, and he had a great Ryder Cup. He played on 4 teams as a player, all 4 won. His record, I got to think about this exactly. I'm pretty sure his record was 10-5-2 or 10-4-2 was his individual record playing on 4 teams. But very early in his career, well before it would have been his time, Luke started talking about wanting to be a Ryder Cup captain and what that would mean to him. And then as he got a little bit older, he even started keeping a journal in some of his last Ryder Cups he played in. And then when he had an opportunity to be a vice captain, he started keeping a journal. Many years before, it became an opportunity for him of things he was learning about being a captain and how he'd want his captaincy to go. So it really was a job that Luke had always valued, had wanted to be, was incredibly thoughtful about, very organized about. And really that for me was, kind of a slightly surreal but incredible moment for me to watch a player you had coached and been with since they were 18 years old and been part of their professional journey. And now it's, I'm calling Luke for coaching advice. We're having a lot of these great conversations that are about coaching and about people on your team and about your group and your organization and building a culture and building a belief system. So it's really interesting for me to be able to have those conversations with him. And I'm learning a lot from him now because he's done it very successfully and put a lot of time into it. So, but that Ryder Cup was really special for us to go to Rome. We had a ton of alums, a lot of Luke's teammates and some of his best friends, but also Northwestern golf alums from many generations that had developed great relationships with Luke. And that's one thing I'm very proud of in our program is that we have a lot of multi-generational relationships that they didn't play golf together at Northwestern, but their only connect is that they played golf at Northwestern. And then they've subsequently become great friends. So, we had Eric Gleacher, who's been one of our most generous donors from 1962, and our indoor facility is named after he and his wife were there. So we had alums that spanned all these different generations that were all there to support Luke. And Luke was nice enough for all his personal tickets. He managed to get us a suite overlooking the first tee. We had this great second floor suite. And so it was a lot of Northwestern people. It was some other Northwestern people, even that didn't play golf. Then it was Luke's childhood friends from England, his family. It was really a neat group of people we had all sitting there. And we were able to get there early in the morning and watch all the songs and the chanting on the first tee and watch everybody tee off and then go get on course. We had the purple flag. We were carrying it everywhere on the course. Everybody was dressed in their Northwestern purple. And really a proud moment for all of us to see this person become this incredible leader who was able to bring that team together from, and I think really the challenge of a Ryder Cup, and you and I have the same challenge, is, as much as they're considered, oh, they're a team, they're Europe. Well, really, Europe's a pretty vast term. He's bringing together a lot of different cultures there and has to build them together into one team. And he was really able to do that. But I think the ultimate moment I've ever seen, Mike, and one guys like you and I could only, you probably had it. You're such a great coach, but only dream about was when he was hoisting that Ryder Cup in the celebration and the award ceremony after, and those players started chanting 2 more years. What an honor for him. So, but that was really a great week. And I was proud of the job Luke did. I felt like he won that thing from the opening ceremonies when he started that speech in Italian and really got the crowd going and really captured his team and the audience there and showed a lot of vulnerability and love for his players that I think really transcended and helped them play the way they wanted.
Well, I've only met him a couple of times when he was in college. Haven't talked to him since, but I've always respected him, what he's done in the game, what he's been able to accomplish. And I think it's really, really cool that a college golf coach is still with him today. And you're still coaching college golf. We know you and I walk the fairways together in Palm Springs. So, it's neat that you've been able to keep that going. So do keep that going. Another relationship with a tour player that you've had is a non-Northwestern player. He played at Wake Forest, is Webb Simpson. And I know you worked with him for about 8 years on his short game and putting. He's one of my favorites in professional golf, period. He's a great human being. And, he's a part-time golfer now, and he makes every cut. I don't know how a person does that at part-time. But tell me about your time with Webb.
Yeah, and the critical thing you said there was great human being. And there's no question that I tell people all the time, Webb Simpson might be the nicest person I've ever met. Almost to a point where I think some people are a little bit, it makes them nervous. Like, God, can a guy really be this nice? Is this genuine? And I can tell you from all those years, I was fortunate to spend with him, and I know you have a great relationship with him. It's genuine. That is a great person with great values. The way he treats his family, the way he treats his wife, the way he treats everybody around him, the way he serves his community is really admirable. But Webb had reached out to me sometime in 2014, and at times I've done a lot of one-offs with a lot of different tour players. I always joke, Mike, that basically if you play the PGA Tour and can't chip, I'm probably one of the guys you've called at some point. You've either texted or called, or I've watched you hit some shots or worked with you some. But a lot of that was just Luke had such a great short game, so guys would be playing with Luke and they'd be like, wow, this guy's doing a lot of things with his ball around the green that I can't do. And they'd start asking Luke questions, and Luke would just be like, you got to call Pat. Just call Pat. So Webb had really reached out to me just because he felt like he was deficient in his short game, and obviously had admired Luke. And they'd had an interesting history together. In 2011, the year Luke won the money list in both the U.S. and Europe, it came down to the last event. And back then, the last event was at Disney. And Webb was second on the money list. Luke was first. Luke was done for the season. In theory, he had put his clubs away. He was going to start. It was off-season time. And then I got a call on about Wednesday or Thursday before Disney that said, hey, Pat, Webb entered this event late. He wants to play. Do you think I should play? Because Webb could pass me on the money list. And then Luke ultimately decided, I got to get my clubs back out of the closet. I got to put in some days of work. I need to go play. Then they were paired together all 4 days, came down to the back 9. Luke putted great on the back, ended up beating Webb by a shot and ultimately winning the money list. So there was really a funny story where Webb had really pushed Luke to play there at the end, and they'd had a great week of great competition that made them both better. But really, Webb, when he reached out to me, he just felt like he didn't chip and pitch it well enough. He also wanted to do some putting. I was actually the guy that worked with Webb when he first, he was obviously a belly putter and an anchorer. And this is when the rule was changing. And to his credit, what Webb decided was that he wanted to change a year early.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't want to stick with it another year.
I had him on my podcast a couple of years ago, and I asked him about that. It was like, that took a lot of guts to do that, and courage and forethought too. I mean, he was thinking ahead of time.
Yeah, he was. And I really thought it was, he wasn't complaining about the rule and saying, oh, I can't believe they're doing this to me. Because Webb wasn't somebody who got to the belly putter because he was a bad putter and he searched for different ways. He started with it when he was a kid.
Yep.
Just some way found out he was a better putter doing it. So he had really grown up playing the game. So he had every right to feel like, wow, the USGA is really stiffing me here. A way that I learned to play golf as a kid is no longer legal. But he really embraced it and said the rule's the rule. And I don't want to be an adopter, at the last minute. I want to get it done right away. So originally we started probably 50% or more putting. And at that point, he went purely conventional, right hand low, holding it traditionally, really worked hard on his fundamentals. But we also worked hard on his short game fundamentals. And I'll never forget the first time I worked with him, basically what he said to me was, I can't hit my ball softly enough. My ball comes off too hot all the time. It jumps, it comes off too hot. Then I try to swing easier and I can't make solid contact. So he was really a case where his fundamentals weren't good enough to hit the shot he wanted. And he had to really learn a new set of short game fundamentals to be able to hit his ball in a different way where he could get it coming off less hot with more spin, not so much speed and jump, which is probably a pretty common mistake we see from good players who can't chip. But one of my favorite parts about working with him, Mike, was, so he kept hiring me and bringing me down to Charlotte for a day or meeting me in Chicago or at an event. And it actually took me quite a few times to Augusta, as he was in the event, and he'd say, hey, I want you to fly to Augusta for the day. I'll drive down and we'll practice there for a day to work on his short game. He was so diligent about working on his short game fundamentals and improving them, but he wasn't using them in competition. So we'd have a period, I'd go at the end of the day, just like with Luke and all these other guys, and I'd go on ShotLink and click through their day, and I'd text Webb and I'd say, hey, saw you hit a great pitch from the runoff area on 10. How was that shot? And I'd get a text back, Coach, I putted that one again. So he was really hesitant, but he kept wanting to work on it, kept wanting to develop it, but then he'd kind of default back to his safety shot. And then at some point, he just finally said, hey, I'm doing this every day at Quail Hollow. I'm doing it in all my practice rounds. I can do this. But there was a moment where he had to decide he was going to jump off that diving board into the deep end and hit this in competition. And he had to talk himself into it a little bit.
That's great. Yeah. Webb Simpson, one of the truly great dudes out there. And I hope he continues to play for a long time. He's a great ambassador for our game. Okay. So we've mentioned two tour players that you've been instructors for, one you coached in college. I want your opinion as to what you think makes a great instructor. And it could be just a couple of qualities or a general philosophy. What's your opinion?
So, and we're talking about a teacher instructor, not a college golf coach, correct?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. And obviously we all know there's a lot of ways to be a great college golf coach. We were talking about different formulas to be a great player. There are really different formulas to be a great college golf coach. And I admire so many people who do it in so many different ways. But I think to be a great teacher, and I think teaching has changed, and some of it for the better, some of it for the worse. And obviously technology has really changed teaching. We have so much more information now, between ground forces, between how easily accessible 3D, between TrackMan and launch monitors that are both measuring the club and the ball. Teachers are a lot smarter and can be much more formulaic on how they develop a person's golf swing and game in any area. But I think one of the things that's getting lost a little bit in modern teaching is when they're just doing it strictly through technology. And I'm really a firm believer that technology plays an important role. And trust me, we love technology. I'm in my golf facility, in my office right now, and down below me, there's swing catalyst, force plates, there's video. We use 3D. We love all of it and try to use it in the correct doses to help players improve. But in the end, I still think there's a lot of value in, you have to get to know a player. You have to really understand their game, their strengths, their weaknesses, their body, where their greatest opportunity for improvement is. And again, I think it's very similar to what we talked about earlier, is players need to be defined by their strengths. So you've got to figure out, are we trying to help a player maximize a strength? Are we trying to minimize a weakness? What is it we're trying to do? But I also think your eyes and your perspective and your history and all the time you've spent in the game play a real value as an instructor. And I know there's a lot of times, Mike, and I'm sure you're this way too, because I know you're a great teacher, that I'm watching somebody hit balls and I can feel my brain working on something, but I can't quite figure out what it is, but I know I've got one of the things I'm very grateful for is obviously I grew up around some great teachers who really influenced me. But then when I went to that Lakeshore Country Club, when I was the assistant coach at Northwestern, that was a heavy teaching job. I was probably teaching 45 or 50 hours a week. Now it's very average players and it's 30-minute lessons primarily. But the best part about that was I had to stand on that tee. I had to figure out how to identify ball flight, figure out what the mistake was, back that down to the simplest thing you could to get that person to improve, and then to get them to embrace something in 30 minutes that they would continue doing and go forward with and have faith in. And I really do think all that time I spent on that lesson tee, just watching people hit balls and really understand what made that ball curve, what made that contact bad, and then having to break it down to a simplest common denominator that you could get somebody to do was really important. But I think the other thing that lacks a little bit of instruction, and especially at our level, is really everything we're doing is about long-term development. Now, you and I are very fortunate. We're working with high skill, high dream people. They want to be tour players. So it's part of our responsibilities to help them develop those skills that give them the best opportunity to do that. And I think a lot of times too many teachers, the kids that you and I have on their team, that kid is the best person the teacher's ever taught. And they get a little scared to address some of the fundamental weaknesses that are going to hold them back long-term. So, and I do think that's part of it too, is understanding your crowd. If you're teaching a 12 handicap who hits balls 1 or 2 days a week, that's a lot different deal than teaching an 18-year-old kid who's hoping to be a tour player someday.
Yeah. So the intuitive nature that a coach has of that. But I think you said something earlier that I think is, you didn't use the word, but simplicity. You're backing it down to the simplest form. You're going through all this, and you did it in 30 minutes there. So I don't know how long you take with a player, but I think sometimes players walk away from a lesson and there's too many thoughts in their heads and they just can't manage it all. And if a kid comes back to my campus and he's just taken a golf lesson and he can't articulate in a very simple form what he's trying to work on and what he's hoping to accomplish, I don't think it was a good lesson, or he wasn't a good student, or both.
No, and I'd agree with that. And it's really important. And then the other thing that happens with great instructors is that doesn't change. That stays the same for a very long time. And Dylan Wu, who played for me and I still coach, who plays the tour, that's one thing with Dylan. We've worked on the same thing since we started back on his full swing a year ago, September. So a year and a half, basically, or a little more, but it hasn't changed that much what he needs to continue to improve and work on. And, I'm part of an academy that I own here, and that does a lot of junior golf camps and so forth. And we get all these kids, and we're on the North Shore of Chicago, which has heavy resources for parents. And so many parents, I feel like in an area like this, really feel like, well, I could buy improvement. If this person went and took a lesson from Pat Goss or Sam McKenney or Tim Strang, these instructors who work for this academy, if I did that 2 days a week, Johnny's really going to improve. The hard part with that is essentially, if you're paying me to come take a golf lesson for an hour and we give you that 1 or 2 things you need to really go work on and improve, if you come back 3 days later, you're just paying me to tell them the same thing and watch them do it for an hour. There's not going to be new information until that player can go be part of the individual learning process and get after it themselves. And ultimately, when lessons really work is when somebody comes back 2, 3, 4 weeks later, whatever the time is, and you're watching them hit balls. And I go, wow, that's really a lot better, Mike. I like the improvement you made. How'd you do that? It amazes me how often that person phrases it differently than what I had told them when they left the lesson. They went and figured it out on their own. They got the effect they needed. They got the result. They did it. But they imagined it in a way different way than I was trying to do, given my perspective and history. And to me, that's when teaching and learning is really valuable.
Excellent. And I think that's where it's missed a lot of times. An instructor sees a kid every week, and then the next week he's afraid to tell him the same thing because the player's going to go, well, what are you giving me? You're not giving me. It's like, no, I gave you something to work on. and you haven't got it work, you haven't worked it in there yet. We've got to get it done. Then that hard work, the blood, sweat, and tears, you can see it in a kid's golf swing when he's done that work. You can see it.
100%. As you and I know, you have to own your own game.
Absolutely.
That's if you have too much, if you're looking too externally for your improvement in your self-worth, you're never going to get it. As teachers, we should be a part of your journey. And basically we're taking our experience and saying, well, based on what I've learned over the years and what I've seen, I think going this route may help you. But ultimately, you got to go figure that out for yourself.
Bob Tway always told me, he says, you better be careful who you give the keys to the car to, or who's all your answers. There needs to be a lot of things you're figuring out on your own as well. You need to be more self-reliant. He kind of fell victim to too much instruction at a very pivotal point in his career, but he learned the hard way that you shouldn't want to do that. So,
yeah. And we've seen that with plenty of players and I will say, with working with the players we do at the high level of college and then professional players, it's really something, I feel quite honored to do, but you have to be careful because you are one piece of bad advice away from really negatively impacting somebody's dreams and career. And that is really a burden you have to pay attention to. And again, simplicity and small amounts of information, really getting to know the player, build that relationship. Those are really critical components.
I think you're right. And an underrated bit of advice to any young instructor would be, there's very, very, very few things you can tell a fantastic player that are going to help him. There's a whole lot of things you can say that will mess him up. So you walk very carefully across those hot coals, if you will.
It's funny, Mike, it's when people ask me about Luke and getting to #1 in the world, I always say that we don't actually know if I helped him. There is no proof that I helped him. There's only proof of one thing, which is I didn't screw him up. That's the only thing we know for sure. And unless we go back to 1998 and Luke Donald starts with another instructor and we see where he got, we'll really never know if I had a positive effect, but we know I didn't hold him back. And honestly, I know people think I'm saying that tongue in cheek, but there's a lot of truth to it. All we know is I didn't screw it up. And obviously that was something we had to do in a thoughtful manner.
I once was being negatively recruited when I was at Oklahoma State by another coach who had told the kid, who revealed to me, he said, yeah, your players, their scoring averages don't improve at Oklahoma State from their senior year in high school to their senior year in college. And I said, well, okay, he's playing easier golf courses in high school, less competition. And the question is, he was a junior golf All-American. Was he a college golf All-American? And the answer almost exclusively was yes in those. And, when we went back and did a data search, we don't know that we helped. We definitely know we didn't screw him up. So you bring up a good point right there. All right. I'm going to ask you about something before I forget it. The putting board that you and Sam McKinney came up with. I want to know about that. How did you come up with the idea? How did you develop that?
Yeah, that's been a really fun project for me, and impressive what Sam has done with it. But basically, the putting board is a putting fundamental aid that really encapsulates what I really believe in putting and what we've always taught about putting, which is a lot about neutrality, which is just really, in the putting stroke, we're trying to maintain lie, maintain loft, have correct acceleration. So it is a little bit methody in putting for sure. And it's the simplest way to putt for sure. It doesn't mean it's the right way to putt for everyone, but it's for surely the simplest way to putt. But, this goes back to, even when Luke was in school and just out of school, we were building homemade putting boards. And it's just a putting board where basically we get that incline shaft on the board and we just really swing that incline shaft in a straight line, keep the lie the same, keep the loft relative to the perpendicular of the shaft the same. And we were building all these homemade tools and using them. And then Sam, he's still our assistant coach for the women's team, back then was our volunteer assistant coach, and he also teaches for the Wildcat Golf Academy. Sam started working with an engineering student at Northwestern to get it built. And back then we were paying a couple $100 a board to build individual ones. And we were just using them with the team, using them in teaching. Luke had used it a lot and built a lot of his putting around it and had one, as did a few other players. And then Sam was really the one who took the initiative to turn it into an actual product. And it took a lot of work for Sam particularly, and to really turn it into a viable product that we could make in enough quantity to sell and find a place to sell it and all of that. But it's been a really fun product for us to develop and sell. We have a lot of tour players by them, a lot of major champions by them, and a lot of average players. So it's really been a fun adventure for me, and something I'm really thankful that a lot of it was based on what I was teaching and what we saw good players doing in putting, but without Sam's perseverance and initiative, it would have never turned into a product. We'd still have these kind of janky old ones we were making sitting around our golf facility.
Well, good job on that. It's great when a project like that comes to fruition and, where it really is something you thought about for a long time and developed it. Earlier, you mentioned a couple of coaches that had influence on your career. So I want to ask that question before we move on, because I usually ask, what's the best piece of advice you've received from any other coach? But in this case, I'm just going to ask, how did these three men you talked about actually impact your coaching?
Yeah, so really the people that most impacted my coaching were the three former coaches at Northwestern before me, and all in very different ways, but very influential ways. And they also affected our program in very influential ways. But one we'd already talked about was Jeff Morey. And Jeff's one of my absolute closest friends and has been the biggest influence on my professional life. He's also been an incredible influence in my personal life. Great person, father to 5 kids. He was successful as a college golf coach. He's been the director of golf at Conway Farms since 1997 and done a great job there. So successful professionally. But, Jeff, as I mentioned early, he believed in me and saw something in me that I don't even know that I saw myself, and really gave me an opportunity that I'm not sure I deserve. And then he's been a big mentor along the way with that. And then he and I co-own this Wildcat Golf Academy together. So we're still doing a lot of things together. And the thing I really learned playing for Jeff and saw with Jeff, he's a great teacher and still is a great teacher. So that was a big part of it. But Jeff really set standards for our program and upheld those. And he was a big part of the growth of our success at Northwestern Golf. And a lot of it was just his sheer will. And again, him setting a standard for the program and holding everybody to that, when not necessarily was our program at that level yet. That was really important with Jeff. I'll tell you the other really important thing I learned from Jeff was in recruiting. As assistant coach, I was doing a lot of the recruiting and sending out a lot of the letters and doing all that and the phone calls, and Jeff was too. But really, my feeling was back then our program was just of a moderate level of success, but we knew we had a great school, great academics. We were located in a great city. We had all these things. So really, we went through a period of time where what we were trying to sell was everything except the golf. Come for great academics, come be part of Chicago, the great golf courses, the great experience at Northwestern, all of this. And then Jeff was really the one who said, we've got to completely change this. Because right now we're attracting kids who want to come here to be great students and ultimately become investment bankers. And they do love golf, but they don't really want to be golfers. We've got to go recruit golfers who see the academics in the city of Chicago and these other periphery things we offer has the benefit, not as the primary. So, and really that's something David Ingalls and I continue to do today, and Em and Beth with the women's program, which is continue to sell our golf programs and our golf development. And kids already know what a great school it is, and they wouldn't be talking to schools like Northwestern or Baylor if they weren't already committed to that type of academic institution. So it's really one of the most valuable things Jeff did for me, and that was really important.
That's great. You mentioned David. I don't want to get through this podcast without actually talking about David. I knew him from his days when he was an All-American at the University of Tulsa, and I walked a bunch of fairways with him in recruiting and coaching. I think he's truly one of the kind of secret sauce kind of guys in all of college golf. You know it because you hired him and you've been with him every day for years now. But what makes him such a great coach? He's really, really good.
Yeah, so I was really fortunate. Steve Bailey, it was the first time I ever got to hire a full-time assistant, was 2005, and Steve Bailey did it from 05 to 10 and then became the head coach at Marquette, where he's really done an incredible job and been a great coach. So then we had an opening, and really went through a full interview process. And I knew of David Ingalls as a player, but I didn't know him. I didn't really remember him. I don't think we were really paired with him when he was in school, but obviously knew the name as a successful player. But he had interviewed for the job, and ultimately we decided to hire him. He was down in Florida. He had finished his professional career. He was working at Bear Lakes Country Club. He'd done some high school coaching and some volunteering. But was really influential to me when I hired David. He obviously didn't have any college golf experience. But the two things that really influenced me in hiring, one were his journey, that he had been this incredible amateur player, a three-time All-American. He won 4 conference championships. He played in a winning Walker Cup team. He'd won the British Boys. He medaled at the British Am. But then his career didn't succeed professionally. And it's always been amazing to me. David has such a way of both talking about his success as an amateur golfer and what he did and how he did it, but he's honestly just as open about what happened to him professionally and why he thinks he didn't succeed. He has no ego about either things. So it really makes him invaluable as a coach because he's offering these two different perspectives, one somewhat from a failure, one from great success, and he doesn't have ego about both of those and can share, and it's really been beneficial for our players. The other thing, the reason I really hired him too, is I called Bill Brogdon, and I know Bill's a good friend of yours and had been such a successful coach and his coach at Tulsa. And Bill said to me, he said, "David's the best I've ever had." And I said, "Oh, he's the best player you've ever coached?" He said, "I didn't say that, Pat. He's the best I've ever had. He's the overall, a student, a player, his work ethic, his teammate, his love for the game. He's the best I've ever had." And always I feel like this, it's been funny when I hired Emily Fletcher and Beth Miller, neither of them had college coaching experience. Steve Bailey hadn't either. We've just tried to really focus on hiring the best people. Because honestly, I joke, Mike, that what you and I do isn't rocket science. We could teach them the college golf over lunch one day, that we got to hire people, and we've got to have certain golf knowledge and golf skills that we can adapt to college golf. And David obviously has been invaluable for our program. He's been doing it since 2010, and he went from being a barely played assistant coach to the associate head coach, and ultimately named him the head men's coach, which, for me, that was a big deal. I'd been the men's golf coach here and had that title for a very long time, but it really meant so much to me that David would stay here, and I saw the value he was bringing to our program, that I knew the right thing to do was for us to switch this title up and give him a lot more responsibility with the men's program, that it was what was best for Northwestern golf. And that surely has turned out. He's done a great job.
Yeah, and I don't want to talk him up too much so he gets hired away from you, but you've done an amazing job of fostering his growth as a coach, of mentoring him as he's come along. But you're right, he may be the best Bill Brogdon ever had, not just a player. He's probably just the best person Bill ever had. And when I think about hiring an assistant coach or somebody that's going to be with me and walk with me, that character part is number one. If they can't pass that test, they're not going to coach at Baylor, not with me, not for me, around me. So you've done a wonderful job with him. But we talked, you briefly mentioned Steve Bailey a couple of times. You want to talk about a great human being. And we're not just patting everybody on the back here today. These are just quality people that happen to be around you. I don't think it's an accident. I think you want to surround yourself with those kind of people. What was Steve's great qualities then?
Yeah, Steve, and he didn't really have, his golf background was the AJGA. And then he got involved. He had his good friend from college at Radford, Chris Skinner, who'd become a quadriplegic and had got involved. And Chris is an unbelievable story, and someday you need to have Steve on your podcast and have him tell about his time with Chris and all that Chris accomplished in life, because it's unbelievable. But Steve had been really involved and worked for Chris's foundation for a long time, as well as his background with the AJGA. And he was another one. At that point, I really wanted to hire somebody who was positive, high energy, would be a great influence on the players, somebody who wanted to really get on the road and do a lot of recruiting. And I would say it's one common denominator. And for any young coaches listening to this, I think the characteristic these two had, which is really critical, is they wanted to coach college golf and impact young people more than anything in the world. That was what mattered to them. And again, from there, the rest of it, you develop skills, you figure it out. It's not that complicated, but that piece of the puzzle was integral for them to be successful. And they both really had that. And that was really, to me, what appealed to me about both of them. But Steve's positivity around the players, his energy, what he built, the enthusiasm for Northwestern golf every day and the way he represented it. He did a great job for us. And I'm so proud of what he's accomplished at Marquette. That's somebody who, what he's achieved is maybe not always fully recognized, but incredibly impressive if anybody really gets down in the dirt and does their homework.
Well, nothing you said about either of these young men has surprised me by any stretch, but the same way that I think it was Amos Alonzo Stagg, who was a Chicago guy, said the reporter asked him after he won a football national championship, said, how is this the best team you've ever coached? He says, I won't know for 20 years. I won't know because I'm going to find out what kind of men they become, fathers, husbands, businessmen, whatever. So I think that's kind of what you do. You hire people around you that are great, and they're great, but man, you can't wait to watch that journey and see how much else they accomplish. And then to know you were a part of that is a great honor.
Yeah, and ultimately that's why you do what we do. My wife talks about this a lot, Mike, because she's such an integral part of our program and really loves these kids and takes great care of them and is invested in them when they're in school and after. But she'll always tell me, she's like, the happiest I ever see you outside of being with your family is when you're with your former players. And honestly, to spend time with these people, you're so fortunate to coach them when they were 18 to 22, but to see them become successful in their chosen professional career, to become great fathers, great husbands, to spend a lot of time with their kids, to be at their weddings. It is the best part of my job. There is no question. Former players are the best part of my job. It's what I get the biggest enjoyment out of.
I am so glad you said that. I've been telling young coaches that for years. I've been telling veteran coaches that for years. You get so wrapped up in that result that you just finished fifth in a tournament. You're upset about it. You forgot. These kids are going to represent Northwestern golf. Our relationship is going to go forever as long as I'm alive. So it's something very valuable, but it's missed on a lot of people because of the need and the press for getting results and rankings and all that.
Yeah, and no question. I mean, I want to win as much as anyone else. It's another reason you don't coach unless you're an incredibly competitive person, so you are always trying to find that balance. But in the end, we know if we can build good relationships with people and they really trust us, they know we have their best interests at heart, we can push them in a healthy way, and still establish a great relationship with them, while being kind of a pain in the ass to them sometimes. That's part of coaching as well.
Well, you mentioned that, you're a competitive guy. And I mentioned earlier that we walked together at Prestige. And I was just looking in my journal here that you beat us by a shot at Prestige. I'm really upset about that. All right.
You should be. You'll get me back. I have no question about that.
Well, listen, Pat, this has been a pleasure. My goodness, you gave me a lot of great information today. My listeners are absolutely going to love this. So I really want to thank you for spending the hour with me, but also looking forward to seeing you hopefully at a regionals or the national championship or both.
Yeah, I hope so. And thanks for having me on, Mike. It's really a pleasure and an honor. And you do such a great job. I bought a bunch of those books and we've given them out to a lot of people. You're better than I found it. So you're an inspiration to all of us and a great coach. It's a pleasure to walk a fairway with you anytime. And thanks again for having me on.
All right. Thanks so much, Pat.